In my experience in working with Saudi Arabia, there are a couple of things that you have to think about in working with the Middle East. A, being a woman. B, the kind of work that you do before you go. First, let's talk about the work. A, the research. You're going to get a contract, and the first thing you need to understand is that your contract is between your company, you as an individual, and another country and another set of standards. So the research you have to do is going to be a little different. Remember, first of all, the document is with a kingdom. So there's a series of assumptions that you may have about due diligence and transparency that don't really impact you in the same way. So get yourself a good lawyer, or more importantly, talk to somebody who's worked in the Middle East, and then they're kind of filling the gaps for you. That in working in a place like Saudi Arabia or other parts of the Middle East, you don't have the same kind of freedom to move around. So you're working somewhere where most things that you're going to be doing, you're going to have to ask for a series of permissions. Not so much to just travel from one country to another in the Middle East, but in your working relationship and also in your ability to leave the country at any time. In spite of the fact that you have a contract, you're still going to have to ask for permission to leave, and something that needs to be negotiated at the airports or as you're leaving your company in terms of the airline tickets and that sort of thing. So you have to kind of wrap your mind around that. So it's just another bureaucratic step that you're always seeking and asking permission to do something. Also, another thing you need to think about in terms of your contract, remember, language isn't key. So what you might think something may say that your contract includes that you can travel with permission to other places, that contract might actually mean that you can travel only within the country that you have the contract with. So you make sure you understand the nuance of that kind of situation. And also that goes for everything else that you think is a given. Your work environment, your work mindset, you will be provided a place to work. Now, if you're thinking that's a desk and a chair, you might be right. If you're thinking it's an office, you might be wrong. So asking those types of questions are key. And also, if you're going on to work somewhere and your housing is going to be provided, find out what that housing is. In many places, it's really probably wonderful housing, but you need to understand what does that mean in terms of transportation. Am I going to be anticipated that I'm getting someplace on my own, or things going to be walkable? All of those types of issues are important, and food is key. If you're going to be working somewhere where there's a Western culture, because many companies have their own environments called compounds, which are actually massive places like forts, then you need to know what's the food going to be there. In Saudi Arabia, the food was fabulous because it represented all of the different cultures that were there, from Western to India to China, and the food of the native people there in Saudi Arabia. So that's a key, but you might be someplace where that isn't necessarily the case, and you need to know. So if you have food allergies, it's great. Your medical issues are the same. How are you going to be dealing with your health issues? Do you go to the hospital? Do you go to a doctor? Your dental issues, those are issues you need to talk about and try to get as full an answer as possible in what you're going to do. Now, being a woman working in the Middle East takes on some interesting challenges. And actually, sometimes the most interesting conversations you're going to have before you go is simple things like, what should I wear? If you're going to places like Saudi Arabia, where you're going to be expected to wear an abaya, which for those of us of a certain age is nothing but a kaftan. But it can be a fancy kaftan. It can be a cloak, as they call it. Or it can be something as simple or as elaborate if you want it to be. But that's an expectation of you from the moment you get off the plane, or at least until you get into a cab on your way to whatever Western type compound that you're going to be living in. If, however, you're going to be living among the people, then you have to understand that that is going to be your absolute costume that you're going to have on all the time. And then the nuances that are going to vary. If you're a Westerner, you're not particularly going to be asked to cover your head because you're a Western woman, and chances are you may be a Christian, so Christians aren't necessarily covering their hair. However, you may be in an environment where you need to adhere to all of the standards of the country. So therefore, your hair should be covered and not just wearing of the cloak. So those are the things that you have to be aware of. And I must say, you need to have a little bit of fun with this, ladies. You know, you can have as fancy an abaya or as plain as an abaya as you want. And as the hotter it gets, you will realize that having that abaya is a wonderful thing, because it's going to help you stay cool, because that is some sort of the historical way that people use some of this covering, was to help you stay cool, because you were able to keep the sun off of you. So these are all those things that you come to understand are the nuances. A lot of times the Western women, you know, are quick once we get on the compound to want to take their, I have sleeveless dresses on. Then you realize that the sleeveless dress in the burning sun was not a good idea. So you'll understand the nuances of why some of these things take place. So that's part of the culture that you have to remember. And you will become to understand that the abaya can be a true personal sort of statement, and you'll begin to understand the nuances of women wearing different abayas, the designers among women who create these abayas, and how over a period of time, particularly in Saudi Arabia, that these outfits became true statements of what people thought about themselves and the people around them. So it's something you can have a lot of fun with and become a real source of conversation when you talk to people about what their abayas mean to them. So it's an important part of that. The other part about being a woman in this environment is, as you're thinking about your contract and you're thinking about going there, you have to think about who are going to be my immediate allies. Who am I going to befriend? Who's going to be part of that discussion? And it's going to be the women that are in your environment. Because the more you're able to be open and talkative, they're going to be curious about you and what you do in your world. You're going to be curious with them. So those conversations in the office, those conversations at lunch, those conversations when you're invited to go have dinner with someone, which is going to happen immediately, you're going to learn a lot about how people interact. And that experience is going to teach you how you interact in the workplace. Because in the workplace, you're going to meet a number of men and women who have varying experiences with Western culture, varying experiences with you. So the conversations may go from simple things like, does Bonanza really wear that outfit? To, because people's in total involvement in Western culture because they're watching cable TV. So something like MTV is flashing in front of them, and they're going to know a little bit about Western culture. Now, being a woman working in the Middle East, I can tell you the things that I enjoy doing, and they're going to seem a little mundane, but nevertheless, they were fun. Going to the mall. And you say, well, what's so exciting about going to the mall? The mall was a place where you could see the culture in action. In Saudi Arabia, where oftentimes single men were not allowed to be in the mall when they were, so you would see men and women, and they were family groups. Or sometimes, women were there with whole groups of other women shopping, and there's a lot of family activity. Or people are in the malls because the malls tended to stay open till very late at night, and it was really a cultural activity. The eating, the looking, the watching other people, it was part of that experience. So that was something that was very much a dynamic. And then also the whole culture of people from other parts of the world working in these cultures, and the interaction between the population and people from India, the people from China who are there working, people from parts of Africa. So you see this dynamic and this interchange of cultures in this kind of hierarchical work setting, and you can see the dynamic of things going on. And of course, the fascination with material culture, the TVs being by, the purses being by, women are always into fashion. So underneath those abayas were some pretty incredible outfits. And more interestingly, the women who were involved in designing abayas and costumes or clothing that reflected the culture were also there. So there's a whole world of people exchanging ideas about the material world in design and expression of who the culture was. So being part of that experience provided a lot of energy for what goes on. So working in Saudi Arabia has a lot of advantages, and in the Middle East. You can use your skills to help cultures define themselves, help define institutions, help be part of that moment. You are then sharing your information that will become part of their culture. So it's not your culture, you are imparting knowledge and will help build their culture. Being a woman there allows you the dynamic of exchange with women, unlike some other experiences in the Western world, because you're going to hear women of all ilks, of all ages, talking about their experience in their life and sharing meals with them and their excitements, their hopes, their failures. It's all there. And at the same time, you can come back to your country and say, you know, I was part of something. I was part of something. I made a difference for a period of time in a country, and now they've taken what I had shared and they're using that to build on their own culture.